We'll go ahead and get started. Hello, folks, and welcome to our February Motivation Monday. Um, so my name is Kimiko Ching. I am facilitating tonight's event. We have for you today Motivation Monday, navigating theory and navigating theory development, graduate students' role in advancing educational psychology. So we will really be talking about um, how theory develops, how graduate students can engage in theories, and what role they have in moving those theories forward. We have our lovely panelists, who I will introduce in just a moment. But I am Kimiko Ching. I will facilitate today's conversation. I am a fifth year at Ohio State. My research engages in theories of motivation, including achievement goal theory, situated expectancy value theory, sense of belonging, and then I usually connect those to students' identities. I'll engage and find connections between theories related to those identities, such as critical mixed race theory, which centers multiracial voices, just because those are my people. They're very near and dear to my heart. So that's one of my main focuses. And then our lovely panelists today. Um, First, we have Dr. Carlton Fong. Dr. Carlton Fong is an associate professor at Texas State University. Dr. Fong uses a sociocultural lens to study motivational factors influencing post-secondary student engagement, learning, and persistence. Uh, Thank you very much, Dr. Fong. And we have links to some of their work that we will be sharing in chat. Up next, we have Dr. Jeffrey Green. Jeff Green is a professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. His main area of scholarship involves how to help people become effective, efficient, and critical users and creators of information in technology contexts. He's published in over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles, conference proceedings, book chapters on self-regulated learning, epistemic cognition, and online learning, among many other topics. He leads lots of research groups, and he is a fellow of Division 15 of APA. And he has been the co-editor of Educational Psychologist with Dr. Lisa Lindenbrink Garcia. And he's the host of APA's Division 15 podcast, Emerging Research in Educational Psychology. And this is Dr. Jeff Green, as opposed to the last picture slide, which was Dr. Carlton Fong. And we have a lovely article from Dr. Green. And then, last but not least, just alphabetically, we have Dr. Allison Zingalowski. Dr. Allison Zingalowski is a teaching assistant professor in learning sciences at Lehigh University. In her research, she draws from perspectives on cognition and metacognition, motivation and emotions, and identity and lived experiences. In teaching, she prioritizes autonomy supportive practices, often integrating design thinking and project-based learning into classroom instruction. She's passionate about supporting current and future scholars to use responsible and critical research methods. So we are very grateful to have our three panelists today sharing with us on theory and moving theory to practice. We will go ahead and start our conversation now. So for anyone new to our Motivation Mondays, our discussion will follow two basic sections. We'll have a discussion with our panelists. We have a list of predetermined questions for them. And then you'll have a chance to ask questions after. You can throw them in the chat. We'll keep track of them. So make sure to throw any questions you have in the chat or hold on to them. We'll have some time at the end. And the first set of questions that are predetermined, the first set is going to focus on their background and then engaging in theory and applying theories in our work. And then we'll move into a discussion on theory development. So, my first question for the panelists, can you describe your work? Explain your research focus and what theories you engage in. Nose Goes only works if multiple people play.
So I can get started. A lot of my work um, comes from research synthesis. And so I think I start with that because I think that kind of positions my view towards theory. Because in a lot of my work, I'm often studying things like motivation and self-regulation. And from a research synthesis perspective, I'm often bridging multiple theories together. I'm often integrating theories together. Um, so I think because of that, I don't strongly align with like a particular set of theories. I mean, I'm primarily a motivation scholar, and so I think there's like a dozen or so motivation theories that are pretty common these days. And it's kind of fun. Like I don't necessarily feel strongly towards a certain one or two. Like I feel like they're all, I don't know if this sounds weird, but kind of all at my disposable. Like I'm at my disposal. Like I can kind of like play around in a lot of these different theoretical spaces. And so maybe that's not a good thing, but I, I don't know. That's what I've done. So.
Yeah, I can build from that. I think similar to Carlton, I think we share some understandings of the ways that we integrate and think about theories. So I think of myself as a learning generalist, someone interested in all aspects of learning and the learning process. I do take an emphasis that I want to understand this through students' own voices and interpretations. So I primarily conduct qualitative and mixed method studies, given their ability to help us understand what students actually think about and how they interpret their learning and academic experiences. So similar to Carlton, this means that in some ways I end up being a sort of theory pluralist, which can definitely be complicated at times. But drawing from lots of different theories, from cognition and self-regulated learning, motivation, identity, critical understandings, but ultimately trying to prioritize understanding a broad range of theories and determining which one is most appropriate for a given project or which one might help me to create the most responsible research questions. But I think for me, it's also important in this to think about epistemology in this conversation. And so for me, I at the root of all of my work is socio-constructivist epistemology. So I believe that all learning happens with and through others. And I also often think about that in context with learners in their broader contexts too.
So I really love that. And I love like learning with and through people and understanding them in their context, because I think when I first got my start in educational psychology, I don't know that was as forefronted as it needs to be. And so that's a really wonderful change. I know that later we're going to get some questions about kind of how things have changed. And I think that's one really important positive change. I've always loved theory. I'll tell you a quick story about kind of how I got involved in theory as a practical matter. So in my doc program, I did some work in epistemic cognition. By the way, I'm not a motivation researcher, so sorry, please be gentle. So I was working in epistemic cognition. I won't bore you with what that is, but I published something to suggest that it had like this new part to it or a different part to it. And then not too long after, Clark Chin wrote an article in which he directly kind of said, like, I'm not sure Jeff's right about that. Right. And I was like, you know what? That's a convincing argument. That makes sense. So about a year later, I was at the American Psychological Association. Thank you, Carlton. I appreciate that. I was at the American Psychological Association conference on a panel with Clark, and someone raised their hand and they're like, Jeff, what do you think about what Clark wrote? And I think he's right. Like, I think that part of my theory I'm just going to get rid of it. And the whole place like gasped. They're all like, oh, and I was like, what? Like, I mean, it's not me. It's like, it's just a theory, it's something that we play with. We try stuff. It works. Sometimes it doesn't work. And, if it doesn't seem to fit, if there's a good argument to suggest it's not relevant, then we just ditch it, right? Like, but people were kind of shocked. And so that got me really interested in kind of how we think about theory and how we can think about it maybe more effectively, or ways in which we can kind of play with theory more. Because I'm not too precious about it. I don't want other people to be precious about it either.
Thank you. I love all these perspectives, how they come together with learning from people, learning and kind of communicating and thinking of theories not necessarily as stagnant, but things that grow and develop. And I feel very validated. I just finished writing a piece for practitioners on how they can think through motivation theories in the classroom. Instead of like saying like, here's one, the best one, use it, like walking through how we can think of these theories as like a multitude of things and tools we can use. So feeling very good about myself with that. So thank you all for your backgrounds. And yes, we do think that you are a motivation researcher, Jeff. So thank you. We just that helps us have kind of a background as we move into the rest of our conversation, so we can see kind of what theories you all are coming from, what backgrounds you all work in. And then you kind of alluded to this, Jeff, but most of our audience members, viewers will be graduate students. So how do you recommend graduate students consider the many theories they're taught during their coursework?
I don't have anything super amazing to say. I'll leave the nuggets to Carlton and Jeff. But I'm about to teach a whole bunch of undergrads a ton of motivational theories. And how I always frame it to them is to think of them as a toolbox. And so you never know when one might become useful, when it might help you to explain something or to better understand something coming through your data. So I think that's one way, is to try to collect them and be able to employ them when they are most useful and when they can support you best. I think the other way is to try to think about how these theories talk to each other, how one can expand on or fill holes in another, the ways that you can use them in conversation to then build to something more, maybe create a new theory, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think I have a very practical suggestion. I just think now is the time where a lot of grad students through their courses are getting exposed to a lot of different theoretical perspectives. Hopefully, you're getting exposed to multiple theoretical perspectives, and I think now is the time um, to kind of start developing kind of that critical thinking through those theories. And so what I often do with the students that I mentor and teach in courses is kind of have like a little column like next to your notes, like however you do it, like some way to track like your thoughts, different issues you might see in the theories, different you know, provocations, right? As you're kind of reading, hopefully some of those foundational theoretical papers. Um, I think that's the time to start really wrestling with that. And, some people are thinking, okay, this is like capital T theory, like I cannot touch them. They're sacred. Um, I don't know. My approach has maybe hasn't been maybe it's been desecrating. I don't know, like not having such like formality towards it, but I think not being afraid to kind of like start tracking some of those observations and thoughts and different questions that might emerge. And so without being, like too defiant, I think during class, you don't want to like necessarily question everything, but I think you can start kind of having that kind of like thoughtful approach towards these theories. So I would suggest that.
Yeah, I totally agree. So theories are really helpful, and it's helpful to understand the arguments for them and understand their, kind of history in the field and what they can and can't do, but they're not sacred. They're not written on stone tablets. And the research would suggest that the best ideas for advancing theories typically come from people who are on this call, right? Like people like me probably are not going to come up with too many great ideas anymore, according to the literature, when it comes to theory, but other people, younger people, people earlier in their career will. I do think two things are really important when being critical, like Carlton has talked about. One is to engage in conversation. Like it's really important to talk about these theories and argue them and explore them from different perspectives. I think it's really hard to kind of by yourself just think about theory and kind of push them. I mean, maybe someone on the call can, and so that's great. But I think it's really useful to have conversations with other people about them. The other thing is I don't know that in a lot of graduate programs, we teach students how to think about theories, like what makes a good theory, and what are the different kinds of theories, and how do we evaluate them, and what can they do, and what can they not do. And so I think there is some utility in looking at some of the literature on theorizing. So there's a robust literature on theories and theory development. And I do think exploring some of that literature will help you be more critical and maybe be a better critic, as Carlton was describing, and then better understand how to compare them and use them, as Allison was talking about.
Thank you all so much. I remember in my first couple years hearing this idea of like drinking from a fire hose. Um, and I wish that I had learned a little earlier to consider it maybe more as like a toolbox, like you said, Allison, where it's like, yes, I'm being thrown all of these things, but they're tools for me to use. And it's so important for us to like meaningfully engage in those, right? In conversation, as you say, Jeff, and using a critical lens as we're thinking through them. Because if we're not actually thinking through and reflecting critically on these theories, it'll help us fully comprehend them, work through them, process them. But then also, if we're not in conversation and thinking through those, how is theory going to continue to develop? Um, so really important perspectives. I really appreciate those answers. And then our next question is, what are the best ways for graduate students? What are the best way for, like, let me try again there. What are the best ways for graduate students to engage in these theories in their work?
I like to start because I think other people are going to take my thoughts and then I don't have anything to say after. So I will start. Um, and not that this is a good answer, but I think one helpful exercise, and this is what I try to engage the students I work with as well with, but thinking about like any educational phenomenon, like learning in whatever context or teaching in whatever context. And once you kind of situate that phenomenon, now try to understand that phenomenon from different theoretical lenses, and then practice applying various theories and seeing, like, kind of evaluate it, right? Kind of be like, okay, this theory allows us to kind of see, these dimensions or these colors like in the phenomenon, but this lens brings out these aspects and yada, yada, yada. So I think that's a helpful exercise both in your coursework and also in your research, right? As you think about, okay, what's the phenomenon of interest that I am studying in this project? And then kind of like, I don't know if everyone does like lighting work in theater, like, you know how they have the different like color, like plasticky things that cover the lights? It's kind of like that, right? It's like, oh, how does this scene look with the fuchsia filter, right? Or how does this look with the green filter? Not Jeff Green filter, like the color green filter. I mean, how would it look with the Jeff Green filter? That's another question. But I think doing that exercise will not only help refine your understanding of that theory and how it can apply to education and whatever learning contexts we're interested in, but I think it allows you to really help kind of wrestle with those theories and see, how it would play out. Because I think when you read a theory paper, you're just kind of like, oh yeah, in the abstract, like that makes sense, I guess. But when you're really wrestling with it with data and with, you know, interviews or surveys or whatever you're working with, then that's when the rubber meets the road and you really see these theories in action. And to me, that's for me when I really kind of saw theory work kind of come to life. So.
Yeah, I really like that. And trying out theories, being playful with theories, I think is kind of Carlton, what you're describing and seeing what they do and what they don't do. I mean, theories should be useful, right? Like they should help us in some way. I mean, that seems like maybe a trite statement, but it's really true, right? There's some theories out there, I look at them and they mention a lot of things, but they don't help me understand anything. Like it's just like a big bucket of words. And I'm like, what does this theory actually help me better understand or predict or do? So I think theories have to have some utility to them. The world is a big, messy, confusing place, and it always will be. But theories at least give us some sense of like, well, maybe we'll try this, or maybe this will work. And I think it's a really good exercise for graduate students to learn about a theory and then think about their own experience or learn about other people's experience and go, does this theory help me kind of get my head around that experience or phenomenon or not? And that can be a great way to start to figuring out which theories are going to prove useful for you and the people you care about, and the things that you care about.
100% echo all of that. Carlton started talking. I was like, "Oh, he did steal my thoughts." But I think for me, when I was in grad school, was often very concerned about what we talked about of like, I have to do this the right way. I have to ask the right research questions. I have to analyze my data in the right way. And I think what's helped me is to try to get into this space of like, it's so much better to just try things out, see how this theory can explain something, see how this theory could help me to imagine pushing the boundaries of the research questions or having a different interpretation of students' experiences. And I think the other thing that has helped me a lot is also to join and create research projects with interdisciplinary teams. I've tried to seek out connections with researchers who focus on race and racism, on critical literacy, Indigenous ways of knowing, so that I can also develop a broader understanding and challenge my understanding of theories.
Absolutely. Fabulous work. I understand why Carlton went first, because I mean, I what was anyone gonna ask? But thank you. But honestly, you built on those thoughts very well. I think thinking through these right as different lenses we can put on, and then when you're applying them, right, putting on right. Well, let's put on my achievement goal theory goggles now for this. Let's put on my expected value theory goggles as we're looking through these problems. And I think that's really important. And then to your point, Allison, the interdisciplinary groups are so important because then we can find these theories that maybe connect to our work or give us a better understanding of the contexts that we're in and the problems that we're studying. Personally, I don't think I would be doing the dissertation work that I am working on doing if I hadn't done interdisciplinary work. I wouldn't use some of the theories that I currently use. So they're so important for us to engage in and use them as different lenses for our own understanding, but also for the benefit of our research. Absolutely. Similar question, but getting more into picking and choosing which theories as we're moving into more specific work. So how would you or how do you guide graduate students through applying theories of research through applying theories for their research, for their writing, for their dissertation work, methods, process?
I will keep going first. unless you stop me. Like, don't. I will go. And
That's on Allison and Jeff to jump in
yeah,
and stop
that's
you.
true. Like, I think I waited like a good 6 seconds. So that was, Um, I have another analogy. And for me, especially once you're in the writing and dissertation research mode, hopefully you've selected your theoretical framework. If you haven't yet, then you might need to get that foundation first, right? And so there's a lot of different like metaphors, like it's the framework for like your building or whatever, or like it's the foundation, right? And I think all of those are helpful. But one thing that I think I often see some potential like pitfalls once you've selected a theory is that the different parts of the research process don't necessarily like align together with the theory that you've chosen. And I think this happens a lot in the dissertation process because it's a long process and you're like, I need to keep everything aligned for like a good 2 years, you know what I mean? And so it's easy to kind of like drift away, once you've kind of proposed something. And so the analogy that came to mind today was um kind of like think of it like an interior designer. And so like once you establish like the aesthetic for like your house, right? Like you're gonna have like one style, like mid-century or like farmhouse, right? Like you have like the look you're going for. Every room or like every piece of furniture or like decor or whatever all kind of has to like match, right? In that style. Like you can't have like a farmhouse kitchen with like a mid-century like industrial thing like coming from the ceiling. Like it's gonna clash, right? And so try to think of it kind of in that cohesive lens. I think especially once you've kind of determined your framework to try to keep things aligned. So whether it's, variable selection, whether it's types of analyses, whether it's interpretation, right? All of these things kind of need to be aligned to the framework. So think of, what style you're going for, and then try to match that like you're but then not everything has to be matchy right? Like you could have your awesome like farmhouse kitchen, but then that little touch, like that little like handle on the cabinet that's like a little industrial kind of like takes it to this next level, so you're not like creating your what's it called, like manufacturer whatever, like kitchen. It's like it's got a little extra, right? And to me, that's the like extension of the theory that you can kind of start to play around with too. So I would say at the dissertation stage, yes, definitely have that alignment, but also there might be those little accents that kind of extend the theory as well. So
Well, I am now feeling a little intimidated. I don't have nearly as cool an analogy as that, but I will. What I will say is many theories have, to me, kind of two levels, right? So for someone who's maybe on the outside of a research literature, like sometimes I will describe a cheap and gold theory or expectancy value theory kind of simplistically. And then, you sit down, you talk to someone who's really invested and they say, well, actually, there's a lot more to it. And you're not really describing that correctly. And I do find that often be the case that theories can be difficult to wrap your head around. It takes a long time to understand them, but that's really important. That's kind of getting at what Carlton was talking about in terms of having the majority of your space follow a certain aesthetic. I think just taking time to really read and reread theories again and again and talk with people about them, and hopefully you've done some research with them prior to your dissertation so that you have a real deep sense of them. Because I think when you have more of a surface sense of them, it can be easy to make some of the missteps that maybe Carlton was talking about, where you're kind of mixing ideas or you're not kind of being consistent in their application. Many theories just have a lot of depth to them and a lot of complexities, and it takes time to understand that. That's why I think it's really important to talk about theory with other people, to hopefully do lots of work with them. And then when you get your dissertation, hopefully you have a deep sense of them so that you know where you need to follow the aesthetic and where you can have a pop of color, or where you can, kind of bring in something a little different, the rooster lamp that offsets the mid-century modern kitchen that you've designed.
Yeah, building on both of those ideas, I think one of the things that I would encourage is to, with theories, start with, of course, those foundational articles and pieces that talk about and explain them, but also be really intentional about seeing what updates have been made, what critiques have been posited, what variations people have argued for or made themselves. Because I think often, I definitely did this in my dissertation. Don't go look at it, but you can almost get caught at that early level and miss some of the more recent things, because we're taught to, okay, you need to cite the first thing, or that's the most foundational piece. So I think for me, it's been a big reminder of like, oh gosh, I have to keep reading. And I think the other thing, building on Carlton's point, is also not necessarily being married to a specific theory when it comes to your dissertation work. Trying to think about your questions, your methods, the theories you use all in concert together. What might be appropriate for building those ideas and arguments. And I think taking it one step, sort of deeper, I think I hate philosophy. But I think it's one of those things that potentially in grad school, it can be helpful for us to think about a little bit more. Again, thinking really intentionally about our epistemologies, about how we think about knowledge and knowing, so that we make sure that all of these things are cohesive, that if we take a more critical approach, that we're not necessarily using post-positivist or positivist theories in our work that might be in conflict with each other. So I think there's a lot of sort of laying the ground work that is hard. We want to get to the study and all of the really fun and exciting stuff. But I think there's some really good time to be spent in building an understanding of who you are as a researcher, who you want to be as a scholar as you move through.
Thank you all so much for those answers. I think they're really meaningful in kind of guiding your work as you think through it, thinking of these theories as your foundation and returning to it as you're thinking through methodology and analysis, but being okay with adding that personality touch to it, adding that extension that is you to the work. If not, we're just repeating research over and over again. So it is important to work in maybe not a rooster lamp, but an accent color somewhere. I don't know if I'd ever encourage a rooster lamp, but working through, right, returning to that as your foundation, to really guide your work as you're writing, and then understanding the complexities and the nuances, because so many of the theories, when we initially learn them, we're gonna learn kind of the base theory as it was written before we get into maybe the complexity and the depth and updates and critiques that we're seeing. So when you're using a theory, making sure you're doing more of a comprehensive search and reading to understand those, instead of necessarily falling all the way down the rabbit hole, so that you can make sure that you are staying kind of in context and with theory that agrees and makes sense with your work. So moving into our theory development. So we've applied theories, engaging with them, but then how theories move and change. First question we have for you all is, how have you seen theories in educational psychology and motivation develop or change in recent years? years. And I'll let you interpret what recent means.
So I'll save Carlton this time and go first. So I think one critique of theory development in educational psychology is that so many theories haven't developed very much. And I think that's a real problem. I think probably one of, if not the most important paper, in my opinion, written in the last now 11 years is Jessica Queer-Gumby and Paul Schutz's paper in Educational Psychologist about race reimaging and race-focused educational psychology theory. That really, so sharply identified that there's a real problem in a lot of theory that has been developed in the past, and that it assumed universality. It was built often in very homogeneous, or what they call kind of weird samples. And that's a real problem. And I think most theories in educational psychology nowadays really need to be kind of maybe set to the side a little bit and maybe rebuilt to some degree with, more disparate samples and a broader lens. I think Alyssa Emery's article about ableism in educational psychology also highlights how, so many articles that you read, from the 80s and 90s, 2000s, like, well, we explicitly excluded students that were identified as special needs or whatever term they used. And it's kind of like, why? Like, why is that a good idea? So I do think that in recent years, there's been more of a focus on trying to re-examine theory and question it from the perspective of what if we had started with a more diverse and representative sample of the world? What would this theory look like? I think Carlton's done some really good work in that area, and there's other people that have too. I think that's super important, and there's just a ton of work to be done in just about every theory out there to take a step back and go, let's just kind of start from ground up again. And if we were starting this theory from the base phenomena with a more diverse sample, what kind of theory might we create? Maybe it'd be the same, or maybe very similar theory to what we have now, but maybe it'd be really different. And I think that's important work to do.
Thank you. Lots of resources being added in the chat, some that you mentioned, some that relate. Well, Allison and Carlton.
Yeah, I should have went first because that was a great answer, and I have some overlap there. But I think, oh, I have a resource. I just saw this
Yeah,
today.
oh, I was going to
Oh,
send yours. I was like, you have a resource that you did, a race reimages.
oh no. I have a resource that I just found today, and now the link is not working. That's weird. Anyways, it's a preprint that Ko Moriyama just posted today, I think, and it was on theory development and motivation. And I was like, how did he know we had a webinar today? And so that was amazing. So I'll find it hopefully. If not, yeah, I'll send it out. But I skimmed it quickly today, and I think one of the arguments it was making was that motivation theory has been, in terms of like new theories, has been pretty stagnant. And, the major theories that we often ground our work in, which is, self-determination theory, EVT, achievement goals, like all of these were developed in like the 70s. And I was like, those are 50 years old now, and so in terms of these kind of major theoretical developments or major like large innovations, I think we haven't really seen those if you maybe use that grain size. But I do think, to Jeff's point about these more kind of extensions, reimaginations, I think have been happening, and I think those are really exciting. And to Jeff's point, to kind of see how all of these theories can be reimagined. And Jamal Matthews and Alan Wakefield just published a motivation science one looking at SEVT through critical race theory, and that paper like keeps me up at night. Like it's so good. Like it's haunting in a good way, like one of those. Because you're like, oh man, this is so good. And it's feels so right, and it's like, oh man, like what am I doing? And I need to really rethink all these things. And so, anyways, papers like that, I think, are needed, and I think also pave the way for these kind of like larger developments of theory as well. So more of what Jamal and other scholars are doing on that front, yeah, and people in this room, right, to take that, run with it, and begin kind of formalizing more of these ways in which theory, um, the way theories have been developed and normed, right? Kind of challenging those socio-historic factors and being able to kind of broaden and diversify our understanding as well. So
We are all on the same wavelength tonight. We're just so cohesive. Yeah, I think lots of similar things to build on and to think of. One thing that I have been just starting to think about in conversation with one of my colleagues, Dr. Taylor Payne, is especially when it comes to this race reimaging work that has been really important in moving our field forward, is also thinking about who are we reimaging for? Who is both the audience and the subject of that work, and how might that complicate things too. But I think going back to Jeff's first point that he made in this panel, I think often in academia, we're really taught to own and defend. We defend our dissertations. We create new theories and have to justify them until we die. And there's kind of this like sense of confidence that we, I think, can often be taught to bring in these areas. So I think things are changing now, and we're starting to see more humility being really explicitly communicated among theorists and other scholars. And I think Jeff made a great example of that earlier today. So I think there has been this a bit more openness to critiquing, to challenging and developing. Again, building off of what Carlton said, I think that Eccles and Wakefield have been great examples of this, of starting with expectancy value theory, shifting to situated expectancy value theory, and then we have that most recent paper with Jamal Matthews and Alan Wakefield about racializing expectancy value theory through critical race theory. So I think seeing this development has been such a nice model for others to recognize that it's not likely going to be perfect the first time that we throw it out there, and that we're all in community with one another. So when we get challenges or people starting to notice nuances, I have really valued the scholars who take those with open arms and really join in on the journey. I think as someone who's written potentially a few too many papers critiquing or sort of accepted assumptions, I really value seeing the field take on the goals of science, to be open to falsifiability, to change as we continue to learn and understand more. So I valued being in conversation with, reviewers, with mentors, with colleagues that are all willing to have conversations to navigate those tensions rather than to shut them down.
And just to build on that a little bit, so I think those conversations are really important, and being open, Allison, as you said, to kind of constructive criticism of theories. And you have a great paper on refutation texts that I think has informed the field really productively. And one of your co-authors actually has a recent publication which I really like, Brendan Schutz, and I'll put it in the chat. But he's introducing computational models and computational modeling to educational psychology. It's a different perspective on how you construct a theory and what a theory should do, and so it's I think it's complementary to some of the things that we've been talking about, but it is different. But I just think the more ways we can think about theory and begin pushing on theory, I think that is a really productive way to go. And so I'm really grateful for people that they critique appropriately, right? They critique theory, but they also critique how we're doing theory. I think that's really important too. And so just want to kind of celebrate those things.
Thank you all. I'm like saving all these links. Some of them I've read, but some of them maybe. Hold on. That new paper I'm very excited to go read later. But thank you for all the resources that you all have shared and these ideas of having those collaborative discussions, having this mentality that critiquing in constructive ways and being in conversation about how these theories maybe need to change is so important. I remember in my first couple of years of grad school being in this position where I really felt like I needed permission to critique a theory because it feels like this hierarchical grounded that's not the way about it, but these hierarchical big capital T theories that you can't necessarily touch because they've existed far longer than you have even been in the field. And this conversation reminded me when I was kind of looking into some measurements and stuff, and I was talking to one of my mentors, and we'll keep him anonymous so that if his colleagues disagree with the statements he made, he's fine. But I was talking to him at a conference and I was saying, hey, I've been looking at this measure that you created, and it's really important and it works, and we've been using it for years. But to be honest, we've been using it since before I was born. And it was validated with all white people. And are we sure that we should still be doing this without revalidating it or reconsidering it? And it was very important for him to look at me and say, no, that's right. You're thinking along the right ways. Do that. Like, yes. Because when I think for grad students, when we're looking at these, we're having these thoughts of like, well, maybe this doesn't quite take into account everyone's perspectives. It's important to think through that. Yes, you are having the right thoughts with that critical lens and having those questions. Now go start having those conversations to work through those and work through that critiquing and discussing how the theories have been applied or measures that are attached to these theories. So yes, fabulous resources. Yes, you have permission to do this if you needed that explicit permission, because I did. What contributes to ongoing development or changes to theories? So we've seen them maybe change and maybe not as much as we have, but what do you see as contributing to these developments or these changes?
Okay, I'll throw some thoughts out there. A couple of things that I think about. I keep coming back to epistemologies, top of mind, but I think educational psychology started with a lot of positivist, post-positivist theories, a lot of universal or generalist assumptions about what we know about learning and learners. And so I think that we've seen a development, a trajectory over time to be more open to socio-constructivist or constructivist theories. And I also think more recently critical theories. So I think we're starting to include more perspectives that integrate structures and systems focused as opposed to only looking at the individual and trying to generalize or universalize all of our theories or ideas. I think we primarily see this happening and being pushed at the ground level from scholars of color, from Indigenous scholars, ones who have been doing this work for some time, but that EdPsych is finally listening to. And I think also from this, we've started to see a bit more openness to qualitative methods, which personally I believe is an incredibly important contribution to developing and changing theories. We need to recognize that life knowledge, lived experiences is still knowledge and our data, and trying to push against a devaluing of those sources in our theory development and our work.
One thing I will add, and this might be I don't think it's that technical, but I think, and once again, I'm informed by the Moriyama piece that I skimmed today. But one thing that resonated with me from that preprint was, and I'm guilty of this, but motivation scholars focusing on constructs and not processes and mechanisms. And I think that's I think that was kind of eye-opening to me because usually we see like a cool like visual figure of something, and then our we naturally gravitate just towards like the boxes and the words in the boxes. And then we're like, haha, I know what I'm gonna measure and I'm gonna do my study now. But then we kind of lose sight of the arrows and like the antecedents and the outcomes and all of the processes that are contained, within the theory. And so I would say developing and changing the theories often needs to go beyond just thinking of the constructs and the addition of new constructs. I think that's important, but also being able to kind of holistically, understand the theory and all its components and processes rather than just kind of saying like, oh, I'm just going to look at these things and see what they do, right? Actually, um, kind of holistically treating the theory. I think that's how we're going to see kind of greater change.
Yeah, that's a great point, Carlton. It kind of gets back to Brendan Schutz's computational modeling paper, and that you take a couple stats courses and you think everything's linear, right? Like, X relates to B and there's a correlation and B causes C, et cetera. Like, and the world is messy and complex and dynamic and nonlinear and all these things. And I think we are just starting to get at the arrows, as Carlton was talking about. In addition, I think on the other end, I think slowly, painfully, not quickly enough, we are beginning to realize that we have a lot more natural history work to do. Darwin spent years collecting butterflies and just looking at the butterflies and being like, what kinds of different butterflies are there, right? And we don't value that work the way that we need to. I was really glad that Allison brought up qualitative work because it's essential to developing good theory. I think natural history is also really important, and that we should find places to publish that kind of work. Like, here's what I see, here's what I've found, like here are voices, here's what people are saying. So autoethnography and other things can be the feeds to that natural history that we need to better understand what boxes we don't have yet in the theory that we need. We didn't know we needed that box, but now someone has told us. So I think we need to do a better job of finding places for that kind of work to be done and to be published. And I do think, again, like, it's the people on this webinar, like, honestly, it's the people who are coming into the field and saying, but what about me? Or what about this person I know, or this phenomenon I know? I don't see those things represented here. It's those kinds of perspectives that will develop theory and lead to change. And it's incumbent upon people who have been around for a little while to create a environment and structures where those kinds of voices are raised up and valued, and given a chance to make a difference. And if we're not doing that, then we're ultimately not going to be developing theory in productive ways, and we're going to be hurting everyone.
Thank you all. I couldn't possibly do justice to everything that you all just shared. But I think there is this massive importance to looking at the theories and listening to what perspectives folks are sharing that are new, or taking different approaches to them, different methodology than what we typically think of doing, because we are such a quant-heavy field, and really being open to that change in how we can think through them. I think this goes back to interdisciplinary work that was brought up really early on in this discussion. Because if you go and you have conversations with folks in higher education studies or folks who are studying more of these race theories and experiences, they're going to look at you and they're going to say, why are you measuring that quantitatively? Or why are you doing it this way? And the moment of like justifying why or thinking through, well, is there a better way for us to understand this truly to get back to, as Carlton said, those processes that are behind what we're thinking about as opposed to just the constructs, is so important. So definitely working through those interdisciplinary works, talking to people who research things differently from you, because there's so many of these methods that we don't use frequently in our field. Like Jeff said, these auto ethnographies and qualitative work that's really going to get us those perspectives that we're missing. So thank you all for those fabulous thoughts on what contributes. I think as we're thinking about what contributes the ongoing development and then tailoring it back to the perspective of graduate students, how can graduate students or how do graduate students contribute to the evolution of these theories?
I can start, and I will say that it's me personally working with all the grad students I've been able to work with that has shaped how I view theory. And that's been really instrumental for me as they bring in their perspectives, as they bring in different theories that they're reading about that I'm not familiar with. And we are in those discussions, like Jeff was talking about, like being able to wrestle and integrate and, just confirm different parts of the theories. And so I would say grad students are a huge part of this, at least for me personally, because that's how I've thought of work around tribal critical race theory, community cultural wealth, like all of these papers and ideas and theories. I wasn't reading them on my own, but it was my students who were saying, hey, I just read this in class. How do you think this dovetails with EBT? And I'm like, let's grab lunch and talk about that. Like that's an opportunity there, right? And so that's been fulfilling for me, and I think we've been able to try to build some of those bridges and make some of those theoretical extensions. And so I would say lean into that, like be brave and try to step out into that space. And beyond testing the theories that you learn in your classes or through your readings, question, discuss, expand those theories. It's not either or. I think it's both, right? I think we test and we extend, expand, and discuss. So.
Jump in. I think I really love those sentiments. And I also think building, Kamiko, from something you mentioned about this interdisciplinarity, I think one of the things that I would always recommend to grad students is to read and to take classes in different disciplines to understand their theoretical foundations. There are a lot of theories outside of the field of ed psych that are well-grounded and have amazing literatures and scholars behind them that we can learn from. And so you don't need to reinvent the wheel or to do something that has already been thought of before. And I think there's more work that we can do to be in conversation with other disciplines. I think the other component is also, I keep saying it over and over, but to do qualitative work also. I think that is one way that we can really effectively bring our communities and our knowledge into the work that we do to figure out what are the boundaries of our theories, what are places where there's more nuance than we originally thought or knew about, thinking about who has been excluded or silenced or overlooked in these theories previously. And I think the other thing that I hope everyone reminds themselves of is that, at least what was communicated to me, the point of getting a higher level degree and a doctorate specifically is to generate knowledge. I think that we sometimes get a little nervous again about critiquing or about how far we can go, how far we can push in the work that we do. But I hope that you all feel supported in taking those risks with people in your programs or in the community here and beyond, so that you can be pushing. Because as Carlton mentioned, early junior scholars, emerging scholars are really the ones who are bringing in these new ideas and this new life to this work. So only want to make sure that you run with it and continue pushing all of us forward.
Yeah, I love all that. And bringing in things from other disciplines is so important. And it ties to what I was thinking about, which is, I remember in graduate school, at one point I complained to someone that I didn't have any time to read. And it was like a faculty member. And the faculty member just looked at me like, this is the most time you're ever going to have to read in your career. And like, it's sad, but true. Like, I remember I was working with Nikki Lobzowski, and she was reading all this stuff about social emotional regulation and all these other fields. And she would come to me and she'd say, like, I was reading this and reading that. I was like, I have no idea what you're reading. Like, I like, and it really became, she had to teach me. And I thought that was actually a really productive kind of conversation. I hope she did too. Like, where I had to be like, you know so much more about this than I do. So please just like educate me. Let's go. And I think that's how graduate students can contribute to evolution, because they bring in new perspectives. They're reading things that I'm not, or the rest of us aren't reading. And, they're really doing the novel work, like, do y'all know that like your PhD is making a bump in knowledge? Have you seen that little graphic with the bump? I'll find it if not. But getting a doctorate, Allison, as you said, is really about kind of contributing to knowledge, and you just make a little contribution that can sometimes turn to something really big. But it's about bringing in new perspectives, and sometimes you have that within yourself, and sometimes it's your instincts and your motivation. Brought it back, motivation, that gets you to reading new things that can just bring a different perspective to the field, and that's really important work that graduate students are really well positioned to do.
Thank you all. I love these snippets of and perspectives that graduate students can take in thinking about how we are in this to generate knowledge, to think through all of this information and how we can work with it and understand it, and thinking through this idea of, right, we all got into the field, we are all getting a higher degree for a reason. And so there is something that pushed us here to be here, something that we were interested in, or that really drew us to studying these things. So this should, right, be guiding our conversations. If we are having these critiques or thoughts on these theories for how they can change and develop, getting into conversations about them, so that I think Carlton said, right, theory isn't going to change if we don't test them, discuss them, and expand them. So in order to develop and expand theories, we have to discuss them. We have to work with them. So thank you all for sharing that. We have one or two more questions, but this is everyone's reminder that if you have questions for our panelists, go ahead and put them in the chat and we will get to them. So this is your intermission flickering of the lights. Go ahead and throw those questions in. But for our panelists, what should guide graduate students through their critiques and challenges to current theory?
I have two thoughts. I think one thought that's kind of been echoed, I think, throughout the webinar is, I think, what should guide our critique and evaluation of theory. I want to draw from what Allison said, is the perspectives, right, based on the communities, right, the community's values, right, that the research will ultimately serve, right? I think drawing from those perspectives will be probably the most critical perspectives, right, in how you reshape or challenge or critique theory. And I think another idea is taking a page out of like grounded theory, the qualitative method where your intent is to develop a theory, right? And so in grounded theory, you look at the empirical information, the empirical data, and you're going to find, confirming and disconfirming evidence, right, of the themes you generate, right? And so I think in that same way, right, we're going to look at whatever empirical information we have and then use that as either confirming or disconfirming. And I think the real interesting part is the disconfirming, right? Every time I read a grounded theory paper, I'm like, let me see what that one person said in that focus group that was like kind of off the wall, but it's, huh, there's also something there, right? And um, so I would kind of offer those two ideas.
So I definitely like that. And Carlton, you reminded me, like Greg Schraw a while back wrote this grounded theory of academic procrastination that like I thought like blew my mind. And it had these just different perspectives on why students procrastinate and what procrastination is. And it really like changed my whole thinking about what that was. And that kind of work you get from qualitative research. And it is sometimes the voices that maybe don't sound like the others, but they're saying something really important that you need to kind of identify and raise up. When I think about critiquing, I just want to make sure that we're adhering to another word that Carlton said, which is values. I think sometimes, at least in the US society, sadly, people are beginning to be rewarded for critiquing as attacking and attacking the person. And, what's the slam? What's the best takedown? Oh, you totally own that person, or whatever the terms are nowadays. That's not at all, I think, how good theory critique happens, right? It's always about the work and the ideas and not the person. I mean, going back to the story I told at the beginning, when I said, listen, that part of my theory, I don't think it works anymore. I didn't feel bad about myself. I don't think I was a bad person. It's like that's how these things happen, right? Like you assert an idea and maybe it works for a while and maybe it doesn't, put it away, but it's about the work. It's not a critique of me. And I get concerned when I see people critiquing people or engaging activities to try to put people down. I think that's not a value I want to see in our field. So I think understanding kind of the norms and practices and values of our field and how to do theory development in ways that benefits everyone and focuses on the work is really important. And I would want to kind of highlight that because there's no need to attack the person.
Yeah, I love these ideas. And I think one of the things that I have tried to challenge myself to do when it comes to theory is not just to take theory as it is and just think that, oh, it works. This is established, but really trying to think about who does it work for, in what context does this work? And again, finding those boundary cases, finding those ways that we can push the barriers a bit. I also think that we have at Psych especially have a lot of foundational theories that have built and strengthened the field into what it is today. But some of those theories and groundings were developed and pushed by eugenicists and white supremacists, by people who didn't care about who their samples were and where they came from. Since they pushed these things as universal, I think Strunk and Andrzejewski did a really wonderful job of really bringing all of that history to the forefront for us and having us contend with and recognize it. So I think for me, what I've tried to do is to dig a little deeper into these theories and to think about where they came from, the ways that they were developed, and to try to tease them apart. So not to take everything as fact, because ultimately science isn't. You know, we're here to constantly challenge our ideas, make sure that we're being responsible so as to support and not harm our communities. And I think ultimately, what I hope all of you bring to your work with theory development is, again, to think about your communities. I find that my work is most meaningful when it's done with and in service of others. And so going to others to learn more about their stories and their lives, I think that will help you to see, again, those boundaries and begin to challenge and build upon some of our current theories.
Thank you all. I love the guidance of thinking through what perspectives maybe we're missing from these foundational theories that we use, how we can go about critiquing and developing these theories. Jeff, when you were talking about, right, it's not me that you are debating when you're critiquing the theory, right? It shouldn't be. It reminded me of these class norms that I set in my class with my undergrads, right? We have these group norms that we set all the time with, we're going to be respectful. We're going to talk about other perspectives. And I started phrasing it in my class as we debate ideas, not people. And I was sitting here and I was like, who? Because that wasn't mine originally. I've used it from somebody, and I think it was actually one of my philosophy professors. So this idea of, as we're critiquing and we're in these discussions, we're debating ideas, we're debating theories, we're not critiquing necessarily the person themselves. And getting into maybe what needs to change, what perspectives are missing from theories, so that we can effectively move these theories forward. I think we do have a question in the chat. When integrating interdisciplinary theoretical perspectives, when can you say enough is enough? So when have you hit the point of saturation where you've brought in enough scholarship which represents the breadth of ideas relevant to your work? It's such a hard question. I'm glad I'm not a panelist. Good luck.
I also went first previously to earn credits for the Q&A, so that's also part of my strategy. So now others can chime in for the first response.
Well, that is pretty savvy, Carlton. I didn't know we were accumulating points. Now I'm okay. That's why you have a mic.
I've been tallying over here.
Okay, good. I think this is a really hard question to answer. I think one way to think about it is no theory is done. And so we're never done with theory. So I think you bring in enough where you feel like, okay, I'm making a contribution. I feel like I'm advancing this theory somehow, and that's enough. And knowing that you might have things in your back pocket or things in a Word doc somewhere, you're like, that's a really great idea. I'm going to get to that someday. But right now I'm focusing on this. This might be something you've already heard, but I usually say to my doc students, just take some of the pressure off. I joke with them that their dissertation will be the worst study they ever do. Because they have the least resources and they've got 5 people micromanaging them and they're on the job market, right? Of course, I mean that facetiously. All dissertations are beautiful, wonderful things, but they don't have to be like the pinnacle of your career. They almost certainly will not be. And so if your dissertation involves advancing a theory in some way, first of all, that's amazing. Congratulations. That's a huge thing. It doesn't have to be the end, and it doesn't have to be your biggest contribution or your best contribution. It just has to be a contribution. And so to some degree, I think you bring in enough that you feel like, okay, this is advancing the theory in a really interesting way. I feel good about this. Let me see what happens. I think that's more than enough for a dissertation, and often more than enough for a paper. And then kind of with each paper, your theories get better and better and better, hopefully, and your work kind of starts expanding and broadening in productive ways. It doesn't all have to happen at once.
Yeah, I think similarly to Jeff, there's really there will never be an ending to this work. I think we can always keep pulling those strands. We can keep going down the rabbit holes. So in some ways, I hate to say it, but there's like no good answer to this question. And so I think Jeff outlined a really good strategy, is to try to come to a place where you are satisfied with these arguments for now. It is not to say that you can't take up these ideas in the future or continue to tease apart or again be in conversation with people. But you know, my advisor always said that the best dissertation is a done dissertation, and so I think that is sometimes the MO that I operate with when it comes to thinking about some of the work that we do, is that it's okay for it to be done and not perfect and not amazing, because again, we still have time to keep playing and to keep chatting with each other about it.
I'll just add a little counter melody, which is the reality of interdisciplinary theoretical work is incredibly hard, and it's incredibly a tall order. As much as we're like spewing, just like do all this like community engaged interdisciplinary work, like do it all. Way easier said than done. And I think interdisciplinary work that's like I'm just gonna grab like one or two little things from this other literature and try to like weave it into what I've currently have. I would maybe say, is that interdisciplinary, right? Like kind of having kind of depth and appreciation of multiple spaces, multiple theoretical spaces, I think does take that time and effort to quote unquote get it right, right? So I just want to maybe make that caveat because I think the beauty of an interdisciplinary piece is that both fields can take a look at it and say, whoa, there's something new that we can each take away from it. But if you're kind of shortchanging one of the fields that you're trying to integrate and you only kind of do like a maybe superficial treatment of that theoretical perspective, then I think maybe folks from that tradition may kind of see, oh, I'm not may question that work. And so I just want to make that caveat too. I think we need to push in that direction, but also know that, man, this work is hard. So
Thank you all. If anyone else has questions, please throw them in the chat. But with your answers for this, I think it's hard to know. And it sounds a little bit like at first when you were talking, it's like it sounds this is like baking with my grandpa, right? It's done when you know it's done. You just it's a vibe. You'll figure it out. And I think there's something to that in, right? We are graduate students right now, and this is a skill to learn of finding that just done enough point in your work, but also acknowledging, right, that it's not the end all be all, and it's not this doesn't need to be this perfectly done thing, but it is a contribution. It is a portion of moving research forward, moving theories forward.
I also am going to chime in for a second.
Let's do
I
it.
can't believe this hasn't come up already, that Dr. Jeff Green and Christy Robinson edited this special collection for, I don't want to get it wrong because I know I already got it wrong. What was the journal? Educational Psychology Review. And I think it's a beautiful collection of getting at some of these ideas that we've tossed around already, of the theorists themselves contending with, discussing some of these theory developments, challenges that they had, thought processes, refinements, all of those things. And so I think Jeff and Christy did a really wonderful job of putting this together and encouraging these authors to be reflective and open with their development, so that we can kind of see under the hood a little bit.
Why, thanks, Allison. You're just stealing the words right out of my mouth. The transition I was going to make was that yes, this was actually inspired by this special collection. We did have Christy on another Motivation Monday, so we didn't want to steal her time too much. But this was kind of the thought process, right? So go read that collection, please do, of, right, how do we move theory forward? Where have we been? Where are we now? And where do we need to go? And to that, yes, as Sanhita said, Jeff, we're just like advertising for you for the next couple of seconds. There's an AERA session on this, so also attend that if you want to continue having this kind of conversation, as has been said multiple times throughout this seminar or this Motivation Monday. It's pretty important to discuss these kind of things. So please do, as we are approaching AERA times.
Well, thanks so much.
Oh,
Can I add one thing to that?
Please. Yes.
So thanks for the shout out. In addition, the new co-editors of Educational Psychologist, which is a journal about theory, are having a special session also at AERA about like how do you develop theory and how do you write theory. So Kristen Muse and Jason Chen are having a session. So if you look for them, you'll see that also. There'll be another great place to go to learn more about theory and theory development.
Fabulous. Thank you. Yes, we shout out Jeff. Jeff shouts out Jason Chen, Motzig. That's why we're here. So thank you all so much. The last question I'll ask just to wrap up, because it's one of my favorite questions whenever I facilitate Motivation Monday, because it's just an hour and a half of amazing information being thrown at you. So if somebody sitting here or somebody who, is watching this later, maybe on 2x speed, remembers nothing else from this conversation, because it was a lot to take in an hour and a half, what would be the takeaway you'd want them to do? And it just like a dissertation, it doesn't have to be the perfect answer, just a contribution.
I would say, first of all, you can do it, right? That, developing theory, critiquing theory, these are things that you can do and should do, and we need you to do it. But I'd also stress Rappaport's rule, right? So Rappaport's rule is that when responding to someone, first you restate their point in a way that is so clear and concise and reflective of their ideas that they go, wow, I wish I said it that way. So I say that to say, critique is amazing when you deeply understand what you're critiquing. So deeply understand the theory, really talk about it, engage with it, and then critique, expand, throw it away, whatever the case may be, but you can do it. That's my takeaway.
I'll probably butcher a Star Trek quote, but I'll say, explore strange new worlds and boldly go where no person has gone before.
I love it. I'm panicking right now, but I think for me, it's to be in conversation, whether that means with the theories, with your peers and colleagues, with your communities. I think the best thing that we can keep doing is to keep talking to each other and challenging one another to move our ideas and hopefully this field to where it has never gone before.
Thank you all. Those were good. Those were very fun answers. But I love everything you all have said. Thank you for your time tonight. And with those closing remarks of deeply understanding, being in conversation, going where no person has gone before, taking our theories to infinity and beyond. Thank you all for your time tonight. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks to you, Kimiko. We appreciate it.